Hi everyone, how's you? Okay, we've got a couple of you here already, that's great. Ah, hi Lisa, how are you? You made it. Hopefully you can spend the next hour and a bit just chilling out. Hopefully you've had a good day. Hi Carol, how are you? Can you all hear me before we continue? Hi Tina. Hi Sharon, lovely to have you all here. I'm just going to check for a thumbs up from someone, just so as I know that you can hear me. Okay, yes. Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Carol. Thank you. So that's all good. Actually, I suppose I should move on the screen, shouldn't I? Just so as you don't know that, so you know that the screen hasn't frozen. Okay, perfect. Hi, Hope. How are you? Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Lisa. That's good. And oh, hi, Michelle from Oregon. Lovely to have you here. Brilliant. Thanks, Sharon. Okay, I'm going to get going today then. I decided I was going to use the corner poppy again today. I used it on Tuesday. It's the pick of the week alongside the corner rose, which has been selling phenomenally well, which has actually prompted Lisa to put on some new picks of the week, which were the re-inkers, which are again at half price. So even I'm tempted to actually get those and sort of fill in the blanks of the re-inkers. It's the re-inkers of the matte blending inks, I believe. So, and I think if I remember right, my memory is terrible. I look at something and I tell myself I should remember it and then promptly forget. But I have a feeling that it's all 3 releases of the matte blending inks that are available. Oh, hi Bonnie, how are you? So yes, so we've got extra picks of the week this week. The corner poppy is still pick of the week. Also, it's at a phenomenal price if you haven't already got this. But I thought I'd use it again today because listening to Lisa's live on Friday, there's a few people asking in response to the new launch. It was the what's the new box again? The Year in Bloom, that's it, the Year in Bloom, which is a set of 12 embossing folders. There's a lot of people wondering and asking how you can craft with it just embossing folders and how you can perhaps colour the images from the embossing folders. Now, there's been a lot of demos just recently with the embossing folders being coloured, and also how to where you just emboss a straight piece, a clear piece of cardstock, or just a white piece of cardstock, and then you swipe your ink pad over the top of the paper, and obviously it picks up, the ink will pick up all the raised areas and all the dimension. So there's been a lot of demos on that. So what I thought I'd show you today is just something a little bit different on how you can actually add specific colour to embossing folders. Now, there are 1 or 2 other videos on YouTube that I've done that covers this also, and if I remember later on I will link those also, because they're using different products, different folders, and they do actually create different effects as well. But what I wanted to show you today, and I'll just bring in what I've already created for you. This was created just using the embossing folder. I have used stencils on this, but I haven't used the corner poppy stencil. So I've actually gone into sort of creating a background for myself. So if I just lift that up a little bit as well, and you can see on the slide next to me here the other products that I use. So I'll go through how we created this. You can create stunning effects just using an embossing folder and using your all sizes of your stencil brushes. So this is where your little stencil brushes really do come into play as well. I'm going to keep my stencils to one side, because if you wanted to enhance what I've already done there, then I can add stenciling to that as well. But it's not essential. So, you know, essentially all I'm using really is the embossing folder for this. So you can see there on the slides the items that I've used. So I've put the Corner Poppy collection on there. I may or may not use the stencils. I don't know. I haven't done on this one. I've also come back to the Fundamentals Nested Arches set. I used the Nested Octagons on Tuesday, but I'm going to use the Nested Arches today, and you'll see a different way of using these. So I'll be sort of flipping them on their side a little bit. I've chosen two other art stencils. These are just background stencils. I've chosen these ones because they are a large size, so this one is slightly larger actually. So this is 5x7, so, and I really wanted that overall pattern. I wanted a repeated pattern, but I wanted a pattern that I can sort of blend into the background, and both of these are perfect for that, and they actually work really well together for what I'm using them for. So that's the Gamer stencil and the Crumpled netting stencils. You can be you can put a search in onto Lisa's website for art stencils and they both come up. And then I've also used something which I don't use that often, which I really should. I really should use more often. And I know that Tina uses these a lot, and she makes them look fabulous. But it's the ribbons and bows. And again, this is still on Lisa's website as well. So I've put the details on the side there. And I'll show you a little bit later on how I use them. But let's say, aside from the Corner Poppy collection that I'm using, everything else that I'm using you can replace with anything else that you have in your stash, and this is just used to embellish what I've already done there, so that can be opened up to your interpretation. And if any of you do decide to create this and put your own spin on it, then I'd love to see that, because say this is what I've chosen, but you can choose any background stencil or any stencil that you think might work in the background. Sentiments make it look different if you decide to put a die cut sentiment on. Even the colours will make it look different. So but it's a really nice one to create. Actually, you can get quite arty with this. So I'm just going to put those to one side. I'm working on a square piece of cardstock. So this is Lisa's Super Smooth. Your ish card would be perfect for this. Okie dokie. There's 12 stencils left and the fold of the poppy is now gone. Okay. Right. Okie doke. So the cardstock that I'm using is slightly smaller than 6x6. I've cut this down because I want because of the size of the card blank that I'm using. So again, even this is flexible, to be honest with you. I cut my piece of cardstock to fit in the folder, and then you can size it down because the design is small enough in the middle. So let me find my folder. So remember, all of the techniques that I'm actually doing today is sort of to prepare you for the Year in Bloom stencils that are coming to you. Many of you would have placed your pre-order, so they'll be on their way very soon. And this can also be used for any one of Lisa's stencils, embossing folders as well. Any one of the florals, any of the backgrounds. Again, I've already done a video a long time ago, actually a good couple of years ago, but I've done it on a background folder. But because it was a floral one, it sort of worked really well. Just because I'm using an embossing folder that has a prominent design on it, it doesn't mean that it can't be used for the background. So you'll see here, the key to this is to actually adding colour to the embossing folder on the right side. So what we need to do is to actually add colour to the side of the embossing folder, which will be on the front of the cardstock, which means we want to, when we open up the folder, we want to add the ink to the image that is debossed into the folder. So you get your two images, and apologies if you've already sort of heard this already, but if there are any new viewers, then it can get quite confusing. It took me ages to actually get to grips with embossing folders, to be honest with you, and I never really used them before Lisa brought hers out. I liked the idea of them, I liked what other people used to do with them, but I could never really make them work myself. So to emboss a piece of card, to have the raised area on the top, which will be your focal point of the card, you want to have the deboss uppermost on your folder. So therefore today we are actually going to be adding the ink to the deboss side of the folder itself. Hazel agrees in the background there. Okay, so I'm using the same colours as I used on my card on Tuesday. Well, I'm using the rhubarb gem. I actually used eucalyptus leaves, but I've gone back to Woodland Moss because I just love it. It's my favourite one. And it matches all of Lisa's new things coming out. Oh, and you wouldn't believe what I've got today. I haven't opened it yet because it literally turned up when I was in the middle of prepping this, but I've got my trimmer. Look, it's still in its packaging, which is really so pretty as well. And I'm a bit of a sucker for nice packaging, and I know that I'm just going to end up keeping this, which I shouldn't. But I've also got my inks. I've also got my metallic inks as well, so, and I haven't opened them either. And I'm not going to use them now. I'm going to stick. I'm not going to get distracted, basically, is what I'm saying. So let's add the colour to our embossing folder. I'm working on a darker background because it really highlights the image an awful lot more here. And if I'm just going to raise this up a little bit, you can see that I've still actually got some colour on this before. To clean this, actually, before I continue, I'll tell you this now before I forget. Because I'm using matte blending ink, which is very easily cleaned up with water, it's water and water reactive. You can just spray this or wash this under a tap or some mild soapy water, and this will clean up absolutely no problem. So you remember to do that before you move on to your next project if you don't want to have that colour transference. But I'm starting off with one of my smaller brushes, and I'm going to add specific colour to my foliage. Now, if you wanted to, you can do one colour all the way across. That's entirely up to you. But as I say, I think it's really nice for you to see that you can actually pick out individual colours. So I'm going to pick up my green, and I'm just going to go through, and I'm just going to add my colour to all the areas of foliage that I can see on my embossing folder. Now, because I'm working on into the deboss, you do have to, be conscious that you do need to work that ink into the deboss of the design there. But with these stencil brushes, it's really quite straightforward. It's not too tricky at all. So, I mean, in a way, it's totally the reverse of what you do with stencils, isn't it? Or similar to what you do with the stencils. You're picking out those areas with those specific colours. And hope, yeah, you can see the ink going on there. And I'm picking out all of those foliage areas. Now, don't worry too much about the ink drying. It will obviously dry. That's the nature of what ink does. But because we're going to add this through the die cutting machine, so it's basically acting as a letterpress, even if that ink has dried a little bit more than you possibly realise, just the act of squashing it and running it through with that pressure through the embossing machine or the die cutting machine is actually going to allow that ink to transfer. So don't worry that you need to work so quick, so you don't have to worry, so before the ink dries. Now I've added plenty of colour there to the green, to the foliage. What I'm just going to do now, this is optional, you don't have to do this, and I didn't do it on this one. And if I just lift this up to you here, you can see that the foliage areas there, you can see where I've added the extra ink around the outside. I don't mind that too much. I think it's fine, but what I will do, just to show you that it works, you can just run around with a bit of a cloth and just, obviously don't go into the deboss of the design, but you can just sort of gently wipe around if you want to take off any of the excess that is sitting around the design of that folder there. So I've done the green, and now I'm going to work into the flowers. So unlike what I've done before, where I just coloured around the edge, I want the colour to actually be all over the flower this time. So initially I'm taking one of my larger stencil brushes and picking up the ink, working from the centre outwards, and I'm just going to add the ink to these flowers. Now again, depending on how you want your flowers to look, depends on where you place the ink, to be honest. If you want all of the flower to be really bold, then add ink all the way around the flower. Smooth it out so you don't have any sort of colour patches, and you can do that by blending as you would do on paper. It works beautifully directly onto this embossing folder material. So just work that colour into all of those areas. Now I'm just using just one colour on these flowers at the moment, and I'm just making sure I cover all of that flower area. Now these are quite circular, so it does mean that I can work in circular motions. Now if you find that your stencil brush isn't quite getting into all the detail, move down in size, because that is the beauty of these different size stencil brushes that you have. And if you find that you don't necessarily use the really small one when you're paper blending or blending on paper, you'll find it really does get into the detail really nicely on these folders like this. Okay, so you may actually start finding a use for all your smaller blending brushes, but do make sure that that ink is evenly distributed on the flower as well. So I'm just going to carry on and blend that ink. Now the more that you get familiar with an embossing folder, you'll start getting familiar and you'll start seeing where you want more colour added. Now looking at this, there's you can see all the petals within the design itself, and I think what I might do in a second, once I've added the colour to all the flowers, I'm going to come back in with the smaller brush, and I'm just going to highlight the centre areas where these flowers are. So again, I'm just really picking out areas of this flower. So I've still got pink all the way around the outside, but the inner detail here, we've got the inner detail of those petals that will give you some more dimension actually, and it almost looks like flowers within a flower. And I'm just adding more ink. So I am in effect layering my ink, but I'm doing it on the embossing folder so it can be transferred. So hopefully you can see that. You can actually see the different areas of ink layering up on this folder. And I'm going to do like so. And I think what I'll do, just before, I didn't do it on the last one. Should I do it on here? Yeah, I think I might. I'm just going to come in with some anthracite. I'm just going to be really gentle with this. I'm going to pick up just a small amount of ink, and I'm just going to do a dab in the centre, because that's where the black of the poppy is, isn't it? So really, really gently. And I'm not putting too much on actually, because it will spread. So I'm going to put a tiny amount of black in the centre there. So hopefully you can see how that ink and the colour is layered up. So now this is ready to transfer onto the cardstock. So I've got my cardstock all ready. Now I'm not going to line up the the cardstock the way that I would normally would. Because I've got no image on here already, I don't need to worry about matching the design as you would have done if you were stenciled. But I do have to be conscious that once the ink is placed, once the paper is placed on here, that it doesn't move about too much, because you'll start sort of smearing and blurring the ink that you've already put down. So the way that this sits, I'm just going to lay the card on, and I'm just going to place it there. So I'm going to make that quite central, so I'm happy with the way that's placed. And I'm just going to close the embossing folder directly and make sure that I really grip those layers. And now when I turn this over, you can see where I've actually laid all the ink. I'm keeping a good grip on all 3 layers, including the paper, so I know that that's not going to move or smudge. And I'm just going to run this through the embossing machine, or die cutting machine. Okay. So when I open this up, you can already see that the ink has been transferred and come through, and you can see just how that ink has transferred, and you can see all that layering of the ink. You can see where I've blended it out, you can see where I've layered more, you can see just that little bit of black that I've laid down too, but you can also see that the ink has sort of been blended around the outside of the leaves, but I don't actually mind that too much. I think that works really nicely. And you'll find actually when you do this technique, each one that you do turns out just that little bit different. So if I just bring the one that I've done this morning and bring that back in, just look at the difference in that, in the two. They look very different, don't they? Even this is enhanced, I think, just by adding that tiny bit of black in the middle. It really makes them look more poppy-like, and the colour looks slightly different as well. So it's a really, really nice effect. If you wanted to add more colour, and make it a little bit more intense and highlight different areas, you could do that, because now that you have this embossed image, it fits and locks into position into this area here. So let's just do that. I'm just going to let me move this on a little bit more so you can see. I'm just going to highlight some of these central areas just a little bit more, with a little bit more colour, just to show you that it can be done. So I'm coming with my small stencil brush, and I'm just going to concentrate on these central areas of the flower. So I'm going to add a little bit more ink, or a little bit more ink here, just on this area. I'm not going to go mad actually, but there's just some areas I think would look really nice, and just to prove a point that you can go back in and add more colour if you wanted to. At this stage, if you felt like, depending on the flower, that actually depend, if you're using perhaps a rose flower, you might want to have a slightly different colour blended into the centre. You know, like you get like some peach roses, don't you, with a more of a yellowy centre. So if you wanted to do that, you could go back in and add that yellow and just sort of build up your layers that way. So I'm just going to add a little bit of ink. It really isn't much this time round, but there's just a couple of areas which I think would really benefit from being a little bit darker. And you can see how I'm just picking out the areas on the embossing folder there with my small stencil brush. Say this is where these small stencil brushes really do come into their own. So I don't need much more ink than that. It really is just sort of fine-tuning the colour. Now I'm pretty sure my image didn't move there, so I can close that straight back down, and I think already you can see the areas where I've added the more colour. So I'm just going to run that through the machine again. Okay, so I'm actually being really quite detailed with what I'm doing here, which gives you probably the longest technique of doing this. If you wanted to just put one colour over the whole image and emboss and then move on to the next stage of the card, then that would work absolutely brilliantly as well. But what I wanted to do is just show you the level of detail in the colouring that you can do with just an embossing folder. So now when I open that up, you can see that those extra areas where I just added that little extra bit of ink in the centre really has made those areas pop. So although I'm not using stencil, so I'm not using a stencil to specifically colour an area, I still think you can get that lovely dimensional look, plus the fact you're getting the embossing as well. I'll show you on the back, but it's quite difficult to show you the embossing on the front there. But I really like the way that that works. It's so pretty. You could actually, I'm actually really happy with that. It's turned out really differently to this one. Really happy with it. You could just go ahead and mount this, add your sentiment, add a bit of a bow or some embellishment on there, and you could just go ahead. You could even frame it. You could just put that on a card, and that would be in itself, I think, perfect to go. But I will show you how I sort of go on to finish this. I think I'll probably put less colour on than I did this one, which is fine because that means I'll end up with two different cards. But I'll show you how I sort of added some embellishment around the outside as well. I'm just looking for my blending mat. Okay. Okay, so what we can do now, we can take our blending brush, and I'm just going to add some colour around the outside. This is where we can start sort of being artistic and going down the sort of the shabby chic sort of route. So I'm taking my blending brush, just a little bit of ink, not too much because I want to blend up the colour, add the colour gradually, and I'm just going to add the colour around the outside. Okay, so you can see where I've colorized this one here, and I'm going to do the same here. I'm probably not going to add quite as much colour on this one because I really like that rhubarb jam colour against the white. That looks really, really pretty. But I will add like a faux border just by blending the ink all the way around the outside. Build it up slowly. I'm using one of Lisa's really early sort of mattes. Actually, it's more like an acetate, but you've got the white, is it magic matte? Messy matte. The messy matte, which is perfect for blending and for sort of this technique as well. And you can see we've created this image and we haven't got an ultimate in sight actually, which is really nice as well. So I'm just going to come all the way around. So bring that green all the way around here so it does take off the whiteness of the card. We're going to utilise this white space here, this blank area, which is something that Lisa was sort of mindful of when she was designing the Dotty Magnolia heart, where she didn't give us the die for the centre. She gave us that open space which allowed us to add embellishments, and I think that is so important on a card. A lot of Lisa's floral designs are amazing. They cover the whole of the 6x6, but then sometimes you don't know where to put the sentiment because you don't want to cover up all that lovely detail that she's given us. Whereas if we've got this white space here, then obviously we don't need to worry about that too much. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave the colour just like that, I think. I'm just going to wipe up this extra ink that I've got on here actually. And I always, when I do these techniques and sort of add colour into the background, it's either I go blue or the Woodland Moss. It's such a lovely colour just to sort of build up slowly. I do like to use it as a neutral. Now what I'm going to do now, I'm coming in with some Almond Frost. You'll notice on here that I've got a tiny little bit of texture on here. Let me see if I can change camera. This one picks it up better actually. Tiny bit of texture here, just adds a little bit and adds to the shabby chic. I'll show you how I do that just now, and I'm using the most neutral colour that we have, which is the Almond Frosting. And what I'm going to do is going to be the direct to paper technique, and really light strokes. I'm just going to stroke that down the card. Now what it is going to do, the majority of the colour is going to be picked up around the edge, which adds a really nice border, but there will be some streaking down the side or down the cardstock as well, and that's what I want, but I really sort of can't stress how light you need to be with this. And what this is also doing, actually, as I'm pulling this over the flower, it's just highlighting some of the tips of the flower as well. So you'll see there just how gentle I was. It's really, really faint. And if I just bring this onto this camera now, you can see we've picked up the colour here. Tiny, tiny flecks of streak in there, which I think is just really nice. And then you can just see here, just some of the outsides of the flowers just been highlighted a little bit as well. So that just sort of makes the whole image sort of blend into itself. Okay, so back to this here. There we are, move that out of the way. So now I want to add a little bit of detail around the floral, just because why not? And this is where I'm going to bring in my art stencils. So I've chosen these two. You can choose whatever you have in your stash. And I'm going to start off with the crumpled netting. You can use this on your ultimate. Lisa's given us the pegs there. I don't need to do that. I'm just going to layer it over my design. And what I want to do, I'm going to add the ink, not over the flowers. I'm going to concentrate on creating a halo around the image here, using the ink. Now I do want to have a little bit of control, well, quite a lot of control actually, with where that ink goes, and I'm going to build it up really slowly because obviously I don't want it to go over the flowers. I'm going to pick up the ink, blend off the majority of that, and I'm just going to stencil around the image but through the netting stencil here. Okay, so what this is in effect doing is I like to call it a halo around, a really soft halo around your image. Now you can probably afford actually to go a little bit darker at the bottom here. So a halo or a shadow effect, actually a shadow would work quite, is quite descriptive as well. But underneath the flowers here, you can afford to, I think you can afford to go a little bit darker. Because when I do these sort of backgrounds, I tend to work on sort of spot highlights. I don't stick to it rigidly, but I like to have like an area that's a lot lighter going into an area that's darker. It just gives a nice flow to what you're creating. So this area under the flowers, I'm going a little bit darker and then just working around. These stencil brushes are perfect for this, and I'm using one of the chunky brushes. I'm just working around through the netting into there. So I'm going to go a little bit darker here as well to take off that whiteness. And it probably doesn't look like I'm actually doing very much, but I'm going to have a quick peek. Yeah, I'm going to take that away, and what you can see, you have a really nice subtle background sort of fading off into sort of lightness there, which again is ideal. I hardly used any ink really, so that gives you that really nice backing, which looks like it's all part of the original design. So that I thought worked really nicely. Then I just wanted to add a little bit of extra dimension, just a bit of colour. So this is where you could actually do this with the netting as well, but this is where I thought the gamer stencil would be ideal because it's such a small design. Stars would work for this, I think, really nice. Little small ditsy daisy flowers I think would work also. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm just going to lay the stencil over the top, but I'm going to go with pink this time. I'm not going to use any more ink other than what's on here because I really don't want the pink to be any brighter than what the flowers are. But I'm just going to do little areas, so basically create little sparkly shine, sort of, you know how a light catches the diamond and you get the little sparks of light, little bursts of light around. That's sort of what I was aiming to create. So I'm just going to go off on little tangents on this, through this stencil, just if I can create that. I really don't want to use loads of ink because I want it to be so subtle, but it makes a huge difference. So I'm just going to have a quick peek. If you're happier using this on the Ultimate, I'm holding this, I'm happy to hold this here, but obviously we do have the pegs here, so you can put this on the Ultimate onto a tacky mat. It means your cardstock will be held, your stencil will be held, and then you're free to stencil. I'm reverting back to type before the days when we had the Ultimate. Actually, this is how I used to craft. So that is all I'm going to add, and when I take that away, what you can see, we have those little bursts of, let me show you here, a little bursts of diamonds sort of going around, and I'll just show you it on here as well. Now what would be nice is to do this in the interference inks, so you have not only these little starbursts, but they would shine and they would sparkle, which would be lovely, or even the metallics, but I haven't opened my metallics yet, so I don't want to sort of risk ruining it at this stage, but you can see just those little sparkles going on. It's just a nice little highlight, I think. So that's a nice way to use your art stencils. So we're not that far off finishing the card now, so we can start thinking about the sentiment. What I want to do first is to mount this onto, let's move this camera back here. I'm going to mount this or matte and layer onto a piece of grey cardstock. So let me do that, and then I'll show you what I've planned for the sentiment and the bow. I think if Tina's still with us, she did say she does like a bow and she uses the bows brilliantly. Oh, let me just unclog my glue. So I'm going to matte and lay this. I always like to try and matte and lay onto grey, sometimes black, but a really sort of darker card. I think it really makes the colours that you've used really pop out and stand out. Again, I could just use this as is, put this onto a card blank, and well, you know, we'd be good to go. But I did say I wanted to use the fundamentals, so I'm going to bring in the nested arches here, and I think these are going to work really nicely for this. So I've already chosen the ones that I'm going to use, and I want to create a frame, and I actually want to use them this way round. Okay, and this is how I'm going to highlight my sentiment. Now I've also die cut the bows, and I've die cut them in the two colours because I wasn't quite sure which I was going to use, and I'm going to add the bow to the card just there. Okay, so I'm just going to add that just so as I can get the placement for my arches. And I want to, what do I want to do? I want to create an aperture, so I only need to use the one of these, but I've layered two of the dies onto the card because I know I want to create a frame as well, and I just want to make sure I get this all placed. So I'm going to take away that larger die, so I can, with my piece of tape, of course, there we are. So I'm going to add my nested arch there, and this is possibly the second smallest of the arch, and I'm just going to die cut straight into what I've been working on. So I'm just going to take that to the machine. And the reason why I wanted to add my matte and layer to start with is because if I were to add my matte and layer now, I would have had the grey show through the aperture, but it would have also meant I would have had to cut an aperture separately into the matte and layer and have it match exactly the the aperture on the front, which would have been too tricky. So I matted and laid first, and then Lisa's dies, of course, are brilliant enough to cut through the 2 layers. So we have our aperture there. So when I lay this, or mat and lay this onto my card blank, which I've coated in like an olive green, we have that green show through, which I think works really well. What I could always do, I do have an arch that I already had in my packaging actually, and I could just add this behind and just see if that works better, which I think it does actually. So I still get my dark frame for my image, but I can just add my I can just add the colour of my choice behind the aperture there. Now what I've also done earlier on, I've used the 2 corresponding sizes, so the die that I've used to cut the aperture and the next size up, and I've cut a frame just to frame this raw edge that I've got here, so I can add that around. So again, that's where my sentiment is going to be. I did do it in pink just to check. What do we think? Now this is where I become indecisive. I think I might go with the I've also got a green bow. No, I'm going to go with I'm going to go with the green frame and a pink bow. That's what I'm doing, I've decided. So this is where we can start building the card. So we can add our frame. So it's a different way to use the nested arches. It's a different way to how you've seen me use the arches before. So I'm going to add my frame to the aperture, and that actually hides that raw edge as well. I mean, it's cut perfectly neatly, but I think it's just nice to have just that finished edge, like so. Okay, like that. And then I can turn that over. I can add glue on the reverse around the aperture, and I can add my alternate colour there. Now this is the beauty of keeping some of your die cuts that you've created for other projects. See, I've got a whole stack of them there. In the envelopes. I didn't know I had that, so it wasn't until I then came to the dies and realised that I had this green. I thought, oh no, that would work perfectly. And then I can add this whole image or this whole layer directly onto the card blank. Now you could obviously use at some stage 3D foam pieces. It would be quite nice to have this aperture recessed and have the whole layer 3D, so you've got some dimension on there, but it's so expensive to send cards these days, isn't it? So it's nice to sort of keep things as flat as possible. So this is building up nicely. So now this is where I can use my die cut bows. Now the pink, you'll notice I've only literally just die cut all I needed. I didn't have enough pink to do the whole bows, but I didn't need them because I only wanted them in a small area. So I'm going to put them on here, and I shall cut these down to size. So we can either do that and lay the green on top, or we can do the green and lay the pink, or we can do the pink and lay the pink. What do we think? I think we'll go with that one actually, to be fair. I think I'll layer the pink outline with the pink die. Now if you look at the bow set, which is here, we get 3 different styles of bows, and you get 2 dies for each actually. So Tina uses these a lot, and she's a whiz with the die cutting. She absolutely is. So if you want more ideas on how to use these bows, then look up Tina's samples in the design team group. There'll be I think regardless of what the release, there'll be a bow or 2 floating around on most of Tina's samples, I would say. Right, now this is where I need some tweezers. Pick those up. Oh. I don't think I have enough finesse for really dainty things. I can be quite clumsy and sometimes, so we'll line that up. Now obviously you can see those glue dots, they will dry clear. Okay, there we go. I think that works for me. Pick that up, move the glue. So before oh, that actually works quite nice coming off of there. I was actually going to trim this down to the size of the layer that I've added, but this actually works really well to the edge of the card there, and I quite like that. So I'm going to leave that as it is. So I can put that there. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And add my glue. Now, apologies again, I haven't looked at any of your comments, have I? Mum, you rather like the bow set. You've only been in 5 minutes, Mum. Oh dear. There we go. So we add the bow there. I think that sets that off really nicely, actually. It's a really nice way to add a sentiment. I like that. Now, what I've done also previously is I've already stamped and die cut some of my sentiments. Now this is entirely up to you how you use this. We have larger sentiments that you can die cut, you have smaller stamped ones. All of these ones I think fit in this window really nicely. And I think what I might do, I might actually leave this blank for as and when I might want to use the card, but we've got plenty that sort of fit within the aperture there. This one I think looks really nice. It'll be nice to die cut as well. And add a sentiment, and I think if I can just, where's that set? One of these new sets that we've got, the Best Wishes set. I pulled this one out earlier, and this wording here fits also perfectly if you were to die cut and add that into that aperture there. That would look amazing. So you could perhaps do that from gold or any of the shiny cardstock that we might have. I did look to see if I had some of the Spellbinders LETTERPRESS that would have been really nice to use, but I only had festive sentiments, so I'll have to remedy that and get some more at some stage. It'd also be a lovely get well card as well, and I know my aunt's not feeling very well at the moment, so it would be a really nice get well card as well, and she does like a bow and ribbon. She's probably got more ribbon than any of us put together. So that's today's card. Lots of techniques there. Hopefully you agree that you can get just as prettier colouring with the embossing folder as I would have done using the stencils. So these are the cards from Tuesday, where I did use the stencils and the poppy, and they look totally different. So there's lots of different ways you can use that. So but today's aim was to get you prepared, ready for your Year in Bloom sets that are coming out to you, which are just embossing folders. There's lots that you can do with them. You can get practicing on the embossing folders that you have already, and then you'll be good to go when they all start dropping through your letterboxes. So I'll leave that with you there today. Actually really enjoyed doing that. Something a little bit different, isn't it? So thanks so much for joining me today and this week. What are we, Thursday? There's no live from Lisa tomorrow. So we'll all be back with you next week. Cheryl will be on Monday. I'll be with you on Tuesday, and I think also Catherine as well. But there'll be a new schedule come out as well, so keep your eye open in the group for that. So take care, everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you all soon.